Good afternoon. Thank you, Dean Rutherford. I've known Skip for a long time. I've admired him for many years. I've worked with him on projects off and on over too many years to mention. And we're so proud of what you're doing here. This is such an important institution, fulfilling a very unique role in this world. And to think that Arkansas is the site of an institution such as this, it makes me proud. Renowned not just within our state or within the United States, but throughout the world for doing something that no other organization is doing, preparing and helping shape future leaders. So congratulations to a job very well done, Dean Rutherford. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to be here today. And part of that honor is because this organization bears the name of my old boss. I won't call him old, he wouldn't like that. My former boss, William Jefferson Clinton. But its mission also incorporates the very philosophy that William Jefferson Clinton preached and acted on during his many years as a public servant. And that is that we are the change we seek. Much of what I learned about political change was from observing people like William Jefferson Clinton, especially during his years as a young governor and then his 8 years as President of the United States. And I'll get a little bit more into that a little later, but I want to thank all of you for being here. I see some really good friends in the audience. Thank you for being here. I know some of you are on your lunch breaks. Hi, Maria. I didn't see you. I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to try to let you get back to your offices before you get a late done. But I want to say that most authors develop two gratitudes over the years: gratitude to our readers and for our audiences. And the truth is that we take a gamble when we sit down and write books, because most authors do write about their own lives, their own experiences. But we also try to write stories that will resonate with a larger audience, and that includes people like you. But I say we're always a little bit like, do you remember Sally Field when she won that Oscar or that Grammy? She was so surprised that people really liked her. And I think authors, in a way, are like that. A good friend of mine recently interviewed me. He read my book and then he interviewed me. But he gave me the ultimate in compliments for an author, and that was that he had stayed up late at night finishing my book. Now, what author doesn't want to hear that? But he also told me something else. He said that he came away from it with the thought that just as I did in Cotton Field of Dreams, that I offered my readers more of my life's lessons. And if that is in fact true, I will tell you it's a testament to the strong hold that my life teachers have had on me. Those people I met throughout my journey who touched my life and impacted my journey in so many ways, beginning with James and Ethel Kearney and the small village that helped raise me. It is for certain that their life lessons I embraced. In Something to Write Home About, my new memoir, I point out that my story is centered around politics, about my political evolution, about how my journey afforded me the opportunity to witness, close hand, both good and bad politics. In my memoir, I share how my political journey began with what I define as bad politics. I, of course, grew up during that pre-civil rights era in Southeast Arkansas. And because of my family challenges and the challenges experienced by so many families that I knew, I could only attest to what was wrong about politics. I saw the role that politics played in maintaining the status quo, even when the status quo worked against more people than I'd like to admit. My siblings and I grew up in an environment that represented much of what bad politics looked like, a time when too many political leaders ignored the plight of families like mine, or the powers that be used their power to punish or to assure that the status quo continued to work for some and isolated others. I was a young adult before I learned there was another side to politics, that there was such a thing as good politics that focused on empowering the masses. There are a number of people I credit with expanding my political education, certainly some of Arkansas's own great politicians like governors turned senators, Bumpers and Pryor, and others that I never had the occasion to meet. Sid McMath, that I've read about and heard about, and Winthrop Rockefeller, and of course our own William Jefferson Clinton. All who practiced good politics as a general rule, proving to people like me that there was another side to politics. I also share in my book that my father was not only an astute observer of politics, but an unwilling victim of bad politics. This was, unfortunately, a large part of my early political education. As in most cases, our definitions of life are shaped through the prism of our own experiences. Needless to say, what I saw and what my parents experienced left me with the thought that this was not something I wanted any parts of. And neither did I have high regards for politicians whose policies and laws contributed to the harsh existence that mine and other families experienced. So it was much later that I would learn that there were good politicians who stepped into that arena with good intentions and governed with the philosophy that every citizen counted and every problem was all of our problems. The first person who impacted that mind change was a young instructor at the University of Arkansas, and I know I've mentioned her before, by the name of Diane Blair, who taught a political science course in such a way that she made me want to participate in politics. The late Diane Blair's course was my first step toward a political conversion. Then, of course, when Bill Clinton became our youngest and most progressive governor, my political conversion expanded. It was during this time that I came to the conclusion that good politics can almost never be attained without change, as painful as it may be for many. And while change is inherent in making things better, a good heart, good intentions are absolute prerequisites. While I've always been too realistic to believe in perfect people and certainly not perfect politicians, I can say that William Jefferson Clinton exhibited both a good heart and good intentions during all the years that I've known him. It wasn't until 1987 that I was reintroduced to a woman I had met as a teenager, Daisy Bates. My parents considered Daisy a great civil rights icon, back when women were rarely mentioned when people talked about civil rights leaders. But Daisy Bates, who would become my friend and my mentor, exemplified another part of good politics, the courage, the tenacity it takes to challenge the status quo. She and her husband, L.C., fought valiantly to change the status quo in Arkansas and the country. And though I don't think she ever considered herself a political leader, I did. In my eyes, she will always be one of my greatest political leaders. So I have come full circle. Thankfully, I can now reconcile the bad politics that was so evident in my early years on Varna Road and good politics that I now understand demands hard work from not just the political leaders, but we, the people, who will be impacted most by it. It demands an open heart, a sense of responsibility to a larger cause, and a belief that everyone deserves an opportunity at the American dream. By the way, there were benefits to that early dose of bad politics. My parents and others were encouraged. They knew the importance of teaching a very important lesson to their children, a sense of responsibility for ourselves and for our communities. And that, I found, is equally important in the effort to create good politics. So today, as I stand here before you, I am not ashamed to tell you that I am filled with a great deal of pride for all the lessons of my past, but also for the possibilities emerging before us. I feel an indescribable pride in what is about to happen for America, the miracle that will take place on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue come January 20th, 2009, when Barack Obama walks into that White House as the first African American to serve as the President of the United States of America. How could I, who've always been taught to dream beyond my reality and know that miracles do happen, how could I not be assured that we are experiencing a miracle in our midst, that we are seeing politics at its very best? As Skip mentioned, my father is 102 years old. I sat with him on election night down in that little house on Varner Road, and we watched the election returns together. And I couldn't begin to describe to you the emotions that passed between us. Him watching something that his reality would never have allowed him to believe as a child, and me watching something that, in spite of our realities, he had always taught us to believe was possible. Yet, my pride goes beyond identifying with our new president-elect simply because of his race. My pride is being a fellow American at this historic time in all of our lives. You see, I'm completely convinced that neither my White House experiences nor Barack Obama's presidency could have happened anywhere else except in these United States. And that's why my heart swells with so much pride in what will take place 2 months from now. But yet, what I also know is that nothing happens in a vacuum. I go back to the miracles in my own life that includes the amazing changes that took place just 15 years ago. It is my hope that as we celebrate this miracle, as we embrace January 20th, 2009, we dare not erase or forget or disregard what we all called a miracle in 1993, just 15 years ago. It was the prolific Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities who coined the phrase, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And on this day, November 24th, 2008, we can say much the same. What a time to be an American, to stand on the cusp of what I believe will be the brightest tomorrow we have ever known. What an opportunity to accept our vulnerabilities, yet at the same time, redouble our efforts to once again be the light bearer for this world. So today, as I find myself still glued to the television set, listening to NPR stations, as I listen to the discussions and feel goosebumps to think of this new day in American and presidential history, I can't help but think back on that day some 15 years ago, when my heart almost burst with a similar pride mixed with awe. I remember with amazing clarity that cold, piercingly bright day of January 20th, 1993, when I walked into that White House. And then 8 years ago, on a cold, gray day, as I left 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue for the very last time, January 20th, 2001, as I walked outside the White House gates, saying goodbye to 8 years of hope and belief in the impossible, of watching an amazing president and his advisors exemplify good politics each and every day, as they tried each day that they walked into their offices to make life better for America, every facet of America, every community, every single human being that called themselves American. Those 8 years, ladies and gentlemen, were an invaluable lesson, a master's course in my political education. And what I know is that those 8 years that I spent in Washington, D.C., between walking into that foreign place and the time I left in 2001, was a critical learning curve for this sharecropper's daughter. It was so important for me to write about that experience, about those years, for 2 reasons. First, because those who read Cotton Field of Dreams asked for it, and secondly, and more importantly, because I am convinced it is a story worth telling. Not because it is my story, but because it is an American story. It is about the American dream. It's a story that your children or your grandchildren might relate to. Examples of hope and dreams being realized. These examples of realizing our dreams in spite of challenges are worthy of sharing because they transcend class and ethnicity. And I truly believe it would be a sin against all of my lessons, all my gifts, to have lived the experiences I have been blessed to live and simply keep them to myself or only share them with a few. I'm a staunch believer that the value of stories is in the telling, that often we can't see the lessons in our own stories, but others who most need them can. So I began working on this book in the midst of writing a couple of others, and I believe it is a story that is worthy of sharing. And I think, unfortunately, that some of you may be a little disappointed because I don't include any salacious gossip, or I don't air any dirty laundry, at least none that you've not heard about already. But I share in this memoir what it was like for someone like me to be thrust into such a public life, of what it was like to exist for that time inside the White House bubble. Amazingly, few people believe me when I say it was a difficult decision for me to say yes to going to the White House. It wasn't something I knew to expect. It wasn't something I planned for. Arkansas was home. It was my comfort zone. My family lived here. My weekend visits to my father were very important. My newspaper. But it was, in fact, my final conversation with my father before leaving Arkansas that convinced me that it was okay to uproot my life, to take a step out on faith and end up in the middle of a life I couldn't have imagined. I describe in my memoir what this life was like for an almost 40-year-old African-American woman who finds herself in something like an Alice in Wonderland experience. If you remember the fairy tale, you'll recall that young, innocent Alice falls down that deep, dark hole and finds herself in the most amazing world. Now, I was neither that young nor so innocent, but that's what the White House experience was like for me. Nothing I could have imagined. But beyond this being a completely different world from all I'd known, the real miracle was that Janis Kearney, daughter of sharecroppers from Varner Road, woke up one day to find herself inside that dream. Now, many of you in this audience have heard me talk about Varner Road, and you know that it's like 180 degrees opposite to the White House. But just imagine in 1963, in my 4th grade year, a teacher looking at me and saying, "Little Janis Kearney, daughter of the poorest sharecroppers on Varner Road, sibling to 18 others, You will be a president's diarist one day. You will ride on Air Force One with the president and the first lady and their entourage. You'll attend a state dinner. You'll sit in the back of a White House conference room and take notes as a president and leaders discuss global issues and global problems. Now tell me, wouldn't you have either reported the teacher to the nearest mental institution or just thought she was off her rocker? It's about miracles. The most important part of my journey has been the people who presented unexpected opportunities to me, sometimes willingly, but often without the scantest knowledge of what gifts they bear. In essence, this book is a presentation of the gifts shared with me, the paths presented to me, and the lessons learned from wise friends and mentors along the way, many of whom taught me by example, others who helped shape me by sheer accident. And if I had to share with you 5 lessons that have been most critical to my journey, it would be these 5 lessons that I have treasured and taken with me. The very first one is the God issue. No one was more surprised than I was in my middle years to finally come to terms with my spirituality. Something that I had been confronted with, something that I had experienced all of my life on Varner Road. But finally, I had to admit a love, a need of a God, to finally accept that he or she had been with me throughout my journey, and in fact, was responsible for the wonderful miracles that had happened along the way. Secondly, the wonderful parent trap, and all of you know that I think parents are the most important part in life, in our journey. And if you've heard me talk, you've heard me mention James and Ethel Kearney. My greatest blessing beyond anything else was God's gift of James and Ethel Kearney in my life, 2 undereducated but supremely wise parents who, without money, without a formal education, without a great deal of community support, successfully raised and shaped 17 citizens of the world through sheer hard work, love, and the belief that tomorrow would be brighter. Thirdly, something I call the pebble in the water phenomenon. Simply put, everything we do, every act we take, every person we bring into our lives impacts something larger in a good or bad way. Our thoughts are powerful because they direct our actions. Our actions, no matter how small, are powerful because they impact our lives, our communities, our world. Our small steps make deep impressions. Fourthly, something I called Politics is Life. This was actually the title of a column that I wrote in Chicago. And in a nutshell, it means that everything in our lives, every problem, every issue, every complaint has some political ramification or resolution. Good politics is about us, everyday people, taking responsibility for our destinies, rather than sitting on our hands and waiting for our leaders to ply us with all the answers. Young people have to do what they did in this last election, take ownership of their lives and their futures. And there's no better way to do that than to get involved in politics. And lastly, the I effect, which means much the same as we are the change we seek. But before we can embrace that, we must accept the fact that there is power within each of us. I was blessed to have been taught that early on, that I was worthy, even when few other people outside my family believed it. But we have to remember people like Mandela, Gandhi, Roosevelt, Lincoln, King, Daisy, and our own Bill Clinton. You, by yourself, can change the status quo. You can make life better. You can assure that tomorrow works for everyone if you embrace the power of I. So in closing, I've had a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I do hope you'll buy the book. I hope you'll read it. But most importantly, I hope that you'll find something, some piece of wisdom in it that you can share with others. This is a wonderful, amazing day for me. And it's very hard for me to forget that 15 years ago, we were standing almost on this precipice, expecting greatness from another president-elect. And I believe we're going to be more than satisfied with this one. And I, for one, was very satisfied with the one that we had. I thank you for having me here. I thank you for letting me share my journey with you. God bless.
All right. Do we have questions?
Hi, Annie.
Hi, Janis. I've known you all of your life. If I won the lottery tomorrow and I could purchase enough books to go to the incarcerated unit on Bonner Road and all the other incarcerated institutions in Arkansas, in particular the poor in Lincoln County, Chico County, Mississippi, and Crittington, and they would have your book in their cells and in their homes, what would be the impact of the conversation between you and that reader? That's what I consider books, a conversation between the reader and the writer. What would be the impact of that many books with this conversation on the state of Arkansas?
That's a great question. And you're asking someone who absolutely believes that books transform us. And of course, the messages in those books are important. I believe, I've read somewhere that most of the people that are incarcerated have a 3rd or 4th grade education. So we know how important education is for people who may or may not end up in crime. My conversation with them would be about how important reading is, how important literacy is. I really believe those are the basics. All of the things that my family did for me, my parents did for us, I think the most important thing was to instill the importance of learning, of knowledge, the power of words, of books. And I think I would spend my time talking to them about that. And I would probably offer my own time to come down and work with them because I know how important it is. Thank you for that question, Annie.
Other questions?
You have rural roots, and during the election process in the primary, you could watch and look at the urban-rural disconnect between Obama and Hillary, and then you could also see it during Obama and McCain in that election time period. It became very apparent with the New York Times articles showing the changing the voting patterns here in Arkansas and the increased support for McCain over what happened in the previous election. With that perspective and your knowledge of what you've been talking about, what's your comment then on that urban-rural disconnect and how we do something about it?
God, I've thought about that a lot. And, I know Arkansas is full of good people. I know that. I was very sad to see that Obama did not get as much support as he did in Arkansas. I think fear plays a huge role in politics. I think a lot of people in the rural areas of this country don't understand or are not familiar with people like Obama. So there was a certain amount of fear, I think, that played a role in that. I'm not sure McCain got as much support because people feel, that much better about him. I think they just didn't know what Obama would offer. And that's on him and that's on his people to help educate and they've got 4 years to work on that, to really make the rural areas know that we're for all people, not just the urban areas, but the rural as well. The South has some ways about it. I'm a Southerner, so I understand. We have to feel really comfortable with someone before we'll give them our vote. And I think that's what we saw. I think, unfortunately, that's what we saw. Even though I certainly think Obama was the best man, obviously a lot of people didn't. It's just, you know, I think it's that clear.
Alex.
First off, thank you very much for coming back. It was a great pleasure to hear your words. I had more of an abstract question, and that was, as a memoirist, how do you strike that line? I think it would be a very difficult line. How do you strike that line between knowing what to write and what to document, especially as it relates to someone that you feel so strongly and passionately about? I would think that'd be a very difficult thing. I'm not sure I could do it, and so I appreciate what you've been able to do. But if you could talk about that. Thank you.
You mean my memoir?
Any
memoir?
Yes.
It is. It's difficult to do it. And you have to really work hard to be as objective as possible. But I never tell anyone that I'm completely objective. I'm a human being. And we bring all of our past, bring all of our prejudices, we bring us to bear when we write a book. So I don't think you should ever expect any memoir to be completely objective. I do try to be truthful as much as possible, and I never try to tell everything in a memoir. I tell what I think is important to this story. A lot of people don't understand is a memoir isn't to tell your whole story, it's to tell a piece of your story, and that's what I try to do. I don't try to tell anyone else's truth, I try to tell my own truth. Thank you.
Got a question right here.
Could you describe your job as the White House diarist, what your day consisted of, what you covered, what you didn't cover?
You got about 24 hours? That's about how long we stayed in the White House each day. My day began very early. I was really lucky that I was able to sit in on the senior staff meeting. I don't see Stephanie Street. Stephanie, who was the scheduler for the White House, she was one of the main people in that early meeting with the chief of staff. But I sat in just to take notes, just to see how the president's day was going to be structured. That's what they did that day, structured the president's day. After that, I went into an Oval Office meeting. I don't know how many of you know Nancy Hernreich, who was head of Oval Office operations, worked with President Clinton for many years. She was the person I worked with very closely in structuring my day, deciding what things I would cover, what meetings I would sit in on, if I was going to travel with the president. So the rest of my day after my meeting with her was shadowing the president. If he was there on campus, if he was at the White House, I would either sit in on meetings. If he did events, I would go to those events and be a fly on the wall, take notes. You know, if he wasn't there, I would use that time to come back to my computer, which was dedicated to my diary, and I would just put in things into the diary, because that could have been a 24-hour job, really. I could have spent the whole day just putting things in, except that a lot of time it was more important for me to try to shadow him. I would be at the office usually 7 or 8. I usually tried to stay there until the president left, because if anything happened, I wanted to be around somewhere where I could take notes on that. So it's a long day.
That means, Kathy, she was there till midnight. You could ask anybody, Margaret, Ann, anybody would tell you that probably President-elect Obama will not keep those kinds of hours that forced Janis to spend the night at the White House. Any other questions? I got one, Janis. Let me ask you this one. Then we'll go ahead. Go ahead and ask yours, and I'll ask mine. Let's get the mic.
Thank you for coming. How did your father really react to the election, his personal feelings about a black president for the United States of America?
He was very, very, very excited, very proud. But I have to tell you that my family basically have been Clinton loyalists for years and years and years. But he was very proud when Obama. And you know, I don't think he would have felt like that just any black person won. He felt like Obama was a good choice for America. He felt very good about that. We talked about it. My father and I have, you know, always talked politics. So he was very excited. He believed that God was in it. He's still a very religious man. He believed God was in it, but he also believed that people came out because they saw that he was the best man for the job.
Other questions? Janis, the best moment in the White House, the worst moment.
Oh, God. Thank you, Skip. I thought I was going to get away with that. Okay, the best moment. I guess, you know, it's a tie between the best moments was the day I walked into the White House and realized that I was not on Varner Road anymore. I didn't have to chop cotton in the summers or pick cotton in the winter. That I was part of the president's staff. And I write somewhere that I literally had to pinch myself just about every morning, given what I came from, to realize that. The other best moment was the day that Nelson Mandela walked in with President Clinton, and I saw two men that I think both are larger than life, who like each other, who understood each other. There was such a great feeling to see this and to be standing there as they both came in. So those are the two great moments. The worst moment, of course, I think you probably know what the worst moment is, but it was during the whole Lewinsky scandal. And I wasn't the only one who felt horrible during that time. Most of us there felt that someone we knew was a great man and a great leader was being targeted. Not to say not to say there's, you know, right or wrong. We know what's right and we know what's wrong, but we also know that this great leader was going to be beleaguered with something that we wished would have stayed in a certain background and been dealt with in a certain way while we went on with the, you know, with the business of running a country. So I think just that, that whole time was the worst moment in the White House.